So this is me. I'm excited to be here today. Thank you for having me. I guess a little bit of introduction. So I actually no longer work in product. I lead a data and strategy team, which is what I'm here to talk to you about. Not because we figured anything out, but because HotelTonight does have a fairly unique setup in terms of how we deal with data. We didn't get there in an elegant way, but we do have a dedicated data team that sits at the executive level, agnostic to all of the functions. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what we've learned. And really, I have 3 goals for today. So one, commiserate, because you guys are my people. I come at a product and we all have data issues. We all are responsible for reporting on things. And if your life is like my 15 years of product life, there's just never good data to really prove what you want to say. So I appreciate the pat on the back and the shoulder to cry on. I also want to share my mistakes and really some problems we've had at HotelTonight, candidly. I normally say, like, let's keep it within this room, but I think this is being both recorded as well as this is a big room. So, you know, when you're telling your friends this next week at work, please leave the HotelTonight part out, or my name at least. Blame it on other people at HotelTonight. And then finally, I want to learn from you. So we have a Slack room, we have Q&A later. Please, I'll be at all the breaks. Please tell me what you're doing on data. I finished with my continued problems, and so hopefully you can help me there. A little bit about me. I started my life in finance. I then went to business school. Like all good MBAs, I was qualified for nothing. And so I took a biz dev job. That biz dev job meant M&A and partnerships. So my job was to make charts, create Excel spreadsheets, negotiate deals, give them to the product managers, you're welcome. And then, of course, the next month report on how our progress was going. And it didn't go very well on almost every deal I worked on, if I'm being honest. That's not what my resume says, but it's true. And I would complain about the product and engineering team, like, what was taking those people so long? So you complain enough, they make you go over there. And so I ended up as a product manager, and I went, oh my God, my bad. I had no idea this is actually how it's done. This is a lot harder than I thought. There's so many more considerations. So that's how I ended up in product 15 years ago. I did product at hospital software company. I then went to a marketplace for hourly workers where I was working with hourly employers and employees. From there, I went to a presentation software company. And 4 years ago, I transitioned to lead product at a company called HotelTonight, which is where I am today still. HotelTonight is the leading destination for mobile bookings, last-minute hotel bookings. Some of you are users, I've found out, so thank you for that. And it's been a wild 4 years there. In that time, I transitioned from product to a data team, and now I really have an operating role. But I want to talk about that product to data journey. Well, in 2016, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I imagine this is probably what data looks like in a lot of your organizations. This was how I had it in most of my companies. So we had an analyst team. Our analyst team happened to report to the CFO. They were responsible for answering ad hoc questions. It was mainly driven by executive curiosities, if I'm being honest. Why is revenue falling here? What's going on in this market? HotelTonight is a hotel marketplace, so we have supply coming in with hotels loading inventory, setting prices, and then demand coming from marketing channels, and obviously the algorithm and the product is what makes it come together. And so there are always questions around, why is New York doing better than Vegas, and things like that. So that's what the analysts work on. The data engineering team was an engineering team, so they reported to our CTO, not unusual or anything magical about that. They were responsible for the warehouse and the ETLs. They also did some of their own research and investigation. They were, like many great engineers, interested in what was going on in the business, but also capable of understanding and closest to the data. And then my life was kind of on this periphery side, right? So I was the product person being like, hey, I got a question. No one had time for me. That was fine. So the same with the marketing people and the supply people, but I think what was particularly problematic about this setup was most of the business driving knowledge needed to be with the product, marketing, and supply teams who are setting the strategies that brought the marketplace together, but we were pretty disassociated from a fragmented data team. Only because people ask me this, here's my little buzzwords. Tools, nothing exciting. We had nothing fancy or unique. Redshift was our warehouse. We used Looker. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Looker. It's a front-end tool for SQLite, I guess I call it, for being able to pull queries and dimensions if you don't really know SQL. And then most of the analysis was done in Excel. There's nothing, again, magical about that. That was just the tool we had. It was robust enough for charting and being able to kind of report out results. So what sucked? Many things, but I'll pick out the highlights that are pertinent today. One, no one was responsible for QAing data. So as the product team, obviously we'd put in our spec the new events that would come through or some of the tagging and the metrics, and we just sent them down the pipeline. I assumed they worked. They was in the spec. I'm sure someone looked at it. Just generally not true. So no one was QAing the data. And so with every new release, there was changes to data, there was new data coming in, and what would happen is that analysts would get an ad hoc question about New York versus Vegas. They'd collect some data, they'd set up some tables, do the analysis, send out the results, and then move on with these tables that were left around. And so inevitably, someone would be like, wait a minute, New Orleans is down 72%. And then you'd be like, no, that's the wrong data table. Don't look at that one, look at this one. So it was kind of a mess. I mean, maybe New Orleans was down 72%. No one was really accountable for it, which was the problem, my second problem, which is there was no functional expertise, right? The analysts were fielding these questions coming in from everywhere, but they didn't have the functional knowledge to understand the different features that were being used that may have been driving the behavior, the different channels that were being used. And frankly, the product marketing and supply teams were running around doing their own analysis because the analysts didn't have time for us. And so we would do our own analysis, but we weren't equipped to be doing analysis at the kind of sophisticated, rigorous level that I think was probably expected for some of these decisions. And then finally, because everybody had questions and there's always too many questions, the analysis was very slow. So our solution was to constantly throw analysts at the problem. And so I think we had an analyst team of 6 people, and we were always had a rec open for more analysts, more analysts, more analysts, because there was really no long-term strategy about like, what are the right questions to ask? Are these the important questions? But we were growing, and it was great. So what were the results? Teams were working off different data sets. That was a big problem. There was no central owner of the truth or kind of what this data means. Like all businesses, they seem so simple in the front, right? So we have a user who comes in and books a hotel room. We take a portion of what that user pays as our revenue. It sounds easy. There are 7,200 different taxing jurisdictions in the United States alone. There are different fee structures and margins across 20,000 different hotel properties in all 50 different states. That's just our US problem in terms of figuring out revenue. Then you add in currency translations, you add in local time, and you add in literally the debate that we had in our company around whether Sunday starts at midnight or 2 a.m. because we sell bookings until 2 a.m. Or excuse me, Sunday ends at midnight or 2 a.m. There's just no definition of revenue. And then finally, we were just continuing to hire people because no one was making decisions and we had more questions. And then the data eng team would always get pulled into doing different pieces of production work. So it was a little bit crazy. There was a lot more work than people. And this is the part I won't put in the slides, but the whole thing came to a head very honestly at an investor meeting. Our CMO, the person who runs marketing, calls it the worst day of his career. He and the CFO and the CEO are presenting to a big investor. It was like a high stakes meeting. And you've seen these, like, it's like this world's longest boardroom table, right, with the fancy glass walls that look like they came out of, what's the HBO hedge fund show? And what is the name of that show? Anyway, not important, baby brain, sorry. Thank you, yes, that was it. So they're at the big table, fancy analysts in button-up shirts that way, HotelTonight team this way, and the CFO and the CMO start talking about marketing results. And things just aren't really driving. And it becomes pretty clear to all of those MBA people that they're working off different numbers. The marketing team and the finance team hadn't pulled the same numbers for the investor deck and were reporting different business performance results. Yeah, ooh is about right, from someone who's had to fundraise, right? That was not a good day. Needless to say, they get in the car, and so I live in San Francisco, our office is in San Francisco, there's this place called Sand Hill Road where all these fancy tables with blue shirts are, the venture capital community. They're driving back. It doesn't even take 10 minutes of getting out of the building before the partner calls the CEO and says, we're out. Everybody gets in a room and says, oh my gosh, what's going on? And it's this, right? Marketing's like, I got the number from the analysts. Finance is like, the analysts couldn't get the data right because of engineering. Engineering's like, you couldn't tell me how to organize the data. And it was a big disaster. Lots of barrel-chested men thundering around in a conference room with lots of testosterone flying, if I'm being really honest about the whole situation. Those of us I actually sat outside 4 kind of rows down, and I remember you could feel the tension in the room, and then you watch people storm out and slam things, and that was famous. Everybody was like, what just happened? So what just happened? We lost the round of funding because we had bad data. So that was 2016. Our CEO came out and decided that I had to fix it, which was a great challenge for me. It was fun to be taking on something new. What was funny about that is I think the head of finance thought he would get engineering and he would be asked to fix it. I think the CTO thought he'd get the analysts and he'd have to fix it. Marketing didn't care, they just wanted the right data. I thought I was winning because I was getting data, right? I can finally fix data. And then the CEO said, but I need you to work on that, not product. So the CEO effectively found the tool or the solution that, whatever the equivalent of cutting the baby in half is, the old story. But everybody got a little bit and everybody lost a little bit. So I created a data team. It's been a rough ride. So this was a year and a half ago. This is where we are today. For the analyst team, I've actually cut the analyst team in half. Point being that most of our problems were on the engineering side and getting the right data and getting the data QA'd and organized. So I overinvested in engineering and I cut the analysts because I also wanted to throttle the number of questions we asked in the organization. One of my mantras is, all questions are not good questions. It's not a nice thing to say. I'm not the most popular girl in class, but I do believe that sometimes the questions that are being asked need to be triaged. And if I think about how we can create bandwidth and make sure the right questions bubble to the top, that's one of the ways I try to solve it. The other thing we've done is assigned analysts to different functional areas. So I have an analyst who's responsible for marketing, someone who's responsible for product, someone who's responsible for supply. On the engineering side, we split data science and data eng. I don't think it was totally fair to have asked those people to do 2 jobs at once, both serving the algorithm, doing analysis, as well as running ETLs and warehousing. And then you're my product people. I'm a product person. Everything is solved by adding a product manager. So that's what I did. But it worked. We actually do stuff that's really good. And so we added a product manager who was responsible for data. So this person is the product owner for data. He is responsible for being the source of truth, understanding his features and the limitation, prioritizing the backlog of what data comes in, and figuring out what the priorities are and how we rationalize across all these different requests, how we manage the incoming downstream data from production and product changes, and frankly, marketing changes. And then he also is responsible for creating a dashboard BI strategy. So what are the common questions? What do we really need to publish and make available? What is our product? How do we visualize our data product to the organization? So this is unique, or from what I understand, talking to most people, this is unique. It's a function of really a catastrophe that we had, but it seems to be working for us. So what's different? We swapped Redshift for Snowflake. That doesn't matter. If anybody wants to talk about that, we can talk about that. But we did insert Tableau. And now, this is not a promotion for Tableau, trust me. I don't know that I'm their happiest customer. But I do think what was important was adding a new tool and a new portal. We had to get rid of the legacy Looker implementation where people were accessing incorrect data. My New Orleans problem, people were still looking at tables that hadn't been QA'd and probably weren't right. We did try to shift the team to Google Docs. The finance team loves Excel. I think pulling them closer to a tech org and getting them to use a collaborative tool so that they can share their learnings was painful, but an important step just to create transparency. And then we use Gitbook for our data dictionary. You guys don't want to hear about that. But what are the results? So things that are going well, if I look at our 4 problems from the 2016 world, we have better data sets. We've spent a lot of time auditing and cleaning up data sets. My right-hand man who leads my data engineering team and I, when we took this challenge on a year and a half ago, we committed to the CEO that we'd have cleaned up data and be able to report our daily metrics consistently and accurately at 7 a.m. every day within a month. It took me 6 months to fix that problem. It was bad. But we got there. We have essential knowledge of truth because we have a product person who is responsible for really understanding those things, and we have analysts who are dedicated to the functions who understand the nuances in each of those data sets. We've built out dashboards for repeatable questions. I would love to tell you that that now means I have an organization and an executive team that's self-serve. I think most of you know. I'll say it, you don't have to say it, executives are lazy. My management team doesn't really self-serve very well. They like to send emails more than they like to log into tools. But if nothing else, the dashboards have helped to create a way for the analysts to answer the same question the same way in multiple times. We haven't really solved this production algo problem. One of the things that happened when we split apart the engineering team is that we left the production tool requirement or obligation products with the engineering team, which was the right decision. They're the team best equipped for that. But what that's created is a little bit of a chasm between my data science team and the engineering team. If I'm being super honest, I think we have an engineering team that's appropriately skeptical, probably like most of your engineering teams. Sorry for the engineers out there, but you guys and gals ask really good questions. So we have a skeptical engineering team, so when we hand over analysis, a lot of times it's like, oh, interesting, let me do that analysis myself and see if I come to the same conclusion. Right? 15 years of product management. I don't know if that's the right priority. Ah! We can't live without the engineers. So we can complain about them because we've outnumbered them today, but tomorrow we all have to go back to work. Other wins that we've got, so we do have dashboards for the whole company. There is more transparency. Again, I would say Tableau created a fresh start for us, which was an important change. Again, it's not about tool selection, but I think the lesson learned here was just changing the system and starting fresh was much easier for us than cleaning up and doing the QA work to get Looker organized and accurate. The functional alignment with the data engineering team who really knows the data sets and functional stakeholders has created an analyst environment where we actually now come up with our own questions and our own ideas. That's been very refreshing. I know that 2 years ago, the analyst team was very much a service organization. I mean, they were ticket takers. There were hundreds of questions, and there was a Trello board of like thousands of questions that they would just, I don't know, shuffle every Monday and never seem to get over to the right. But we've done a better job now because we have deeper functional knowledge to be able to surface questions and bring back insights to the organization. And for better or for worse, this is unsexy but very true. Having a clear, repeatable process to be able to clean and QA the data. And now that we've done this so many times and we had to fix all of the mistakes of the legacy work, we really have honed in on a good process for making sure we don't screw it up again in the future. What sucks? Not enough embedded with the teams. So this is a little bit of a nod to the engineering challenge. But we do have this continued disconnect of this data team who sits on the sidelines in some ways or sits in the middle, depending on how you think about it, but isn't really on the team. And so there are some times where people will say, well, you're not part of the team or you don't understand it enough. And so I do struggle with buy-in. There is increasingly a blurred line between tools that are internal and external, and so some of our reports are now getting sent out to hotel partners or different vendors, and I think that's both a cool opportunity about the work we're creating, but a challenge in terms of figuring out how to get the right product built, because now that's a different user, as you guys understand, and the expectations are different. Finally, there's just always a million questions, never enough analyst times. The interesting thing I would say that's been a problem about this org design and this solution to the data problem is that we now have this thing that I've labeled false dependencies. And so initiatives will come up, ideas will come up, and rather than saying no, executives or organizational stakeholders will say things like, well, did the data team look at that? We should have the data team look at that. And so it's this like false dependency and blocker that now is this analysis paralysis that kind of goes through the team when there's a decision that either can't be made or won't be made and people aren't willing to say no, they just kind of freeze. So I think that's something I'm wrestling with. And then if I'm being really authentic, I'm not a developer. I have an incredibly talented engineering team, but they are missing spiritual leadership. And so I've had some turnover on people who are like, hey, look, I love the work we're doing. I think we're solving really cool problems, but I want to work for a development lead. I want a CTO. I want a VP Eng who really is that kind of spiritual leader. So I present these problems as things that I'm wrestling with. If you figured them out, grab me. That would be great. Let's talk about it. Lessons learned. So these are takeaways that I hope you can bring back to your organizations. I've got a couple more later. It's easier to implement a new tool than to clean up legacy tools. Trust me, we tried. I'm just willing to throw away the old implementation and start fresh. Establishing trust takes a really long time. We worked on this. It's been 18 months. And I would still say we have that problem with the embed teams. I didn't really realize how bad the problem was. But I also didn't realize how long it was going to take for repeated successes to actually get credibility within an organization. And then the false dependency, which we talked about. So that's my life today, what's good and what's bad, and a little bit about what we've learned about how to do data maybe better, but not perfectly. Things I wrestle with. How do we ensure that the most important questions are getting answered? There's also blurry lines between roles and functions now. So suddenly everybody's a data scientist. Is anybody seeing this? Like, what is that? I'm in San Francisco. There's an incredible a war for talent, as there isn't everywhere, but particularly around data right now with a lot of the things going on in Silicon Valley, everybody's fighting over data talent. And so people who I would consider it either a BI dashboarding job or even a basic analyst job is now a data scientist. And that's creating organizational FUD, both in terms of what people's titles are and competition on hiring. So that's getting a little wonky. And then the other thing is, we haven't cornered the market on analysis. It's not like we have a data team and we're the only people who can do math or like make Excel charts or whatever, right? This is a core function that everybody does. So I'm wrestling with how to create a central repository where we don't just send out our analysis, but we're able to receive the analysis of other teams. And so how do I look at what the marketers are finding and what the product managers are learning and kind of create this bi-directional sense of learning. So that's my life. This is what we've done. What I hope you can take with you, if I were a product manager or a designer sitting in this audience, what I want you to advocate for on Monday. 1, data's a product. Who's your product manager on data? I challenge all of you to identify that person. Data needs to be spec'd. It needs to be maintained. It even needs to be sunset. Killing old tables and cleaning up legacy data is about 10 to 15% of my team's time, just because if it sits out there, someone will get a hold of it, run that New Orleans analysis, and then panic will ensue. So kill your old data products. 2, and this is controversial, as an agile product person, documentation matters. I hate documentation. We all hate documentation, but I have suffered through this extensively on the data side, so we actually do spend a decent amount of time in the nitty-gritty of documenting all of these nuances and edge cases and these calculations. And then finally, my hope for you is that you never have to go through that meeting with the big barrel-chested testosterone flowing crazy. My hope for you is that you can find a way to get on top of this now, really get someone who's going to own these product problems and get the organization ahead, because that was a really painful 6 months. That was a really tough time for our company, and it was totally self-inflicted. We could have survived this had we just gotten a little more organized and been a little more proactive in how we were going to operationalize this and prevented a lot of problems. So that's my lesson learned. Those are my scar tissues. I would love to hear what you guys are learning, and let's talk more around what data is working for you. So thank you.